So throughout the week, as I'm working on projects, if I run into a question or a topic that I think is worth a deep dive, I put it in my little field notes here, and then come back to it in this weekly readout. So the topics aren't in any particular order, but they line up with the general interests of this channel. So music, composition, meditation, prayer, scripture. And I thought it'd be nice to just take a more relaxed view. Relaxed review week over week. This is the Lane 1Q cherry tobacco. I used to smoke a lot of heavier tobacco, English blends like Acela per week. But when I stopped drinking, those heavy, harsh tobaccos are delicious when you're drinking like a straight bourbon. But I have a bittersweet cordial and soda, or tonic. So topic number one, the Odyssey. So the Odyssey movie is coming out next month, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Last year I read the Emily Wilson translation of the Iliad, and I think 2 years before that she published the Odyssey. And I think Emily Wilson is involved somehow in this movie. If you have not read that translation, it's well worth reading. The other translation that is really good is by Robert Faggles. And I read that 5 or 6 years ago because I was listening to the Literature and History podcast with Doug, what's his name? Watch that. So I listened to that podcast because it's absolutely fantastic. He actually really revitalized my interest in Greek tragedy. A whole series on Orestes. It was almost like being in ancient Greece, watching the plays. It was such a vivid retelling of the play, but also of the context. So my advice before going to see the movie is to catch the literatureandhistory.com podcast with Doug. I can't remember his last name, but he's awesome. And check out the Emily Wilson. Even if you don't think of yourself as like a classical Greek scholar, I think you'll just find her language unbelievable. She has a Substack where she talks about the translation of philosophy. And she's trying to not just translate accurately, but translate idiomatically so that the vibe of the language makes sense in our use. So if it's formal, it will sound formal. If it's informal, it will sound informal. And it's such a good read. Like really, it's not like studying. It's really a good read. So check out the Odyssey. It's also cool that in Barnes & Noble there's all kinds of merchandise around the Odyssey now. So maybe this is the summer of the Odyssey. like when was it? Was it last summer? 2 summers ago was Barbie and Oppenheimer. Maybe this summer is the Odyssey. I showed this at the start of the video. This is one of my everyday carry. Just put a bit of thought into this recently. But I actually wanted to introduce friction between myself and my phone. And my phone right now is here because I'm recording on it. But I find it's just too easy to go straight to the phone. So what I'm doing is I clip my phone into here using this elastic band. So it's there, like if I need to use it. But if I have anything, my rule is if anything comes up before I Google something, for example, I'll write it down. This is important. Right? It's too easy for a question to come up, and the next thing I know, I'm looking on my phone. So my advice for myself and for you, if you're trying to reduce screen time, is capture the questions, and then once a day go in and don't use your phone, use a laptop or an iPad, a bigger screen, and kind of set 10 minutes to answer questions. Most of the time, the questions that I found that I've captured, of course, you guess they're just not meaningful anymore. Just that moment of friction. I find that the screen lock applications just don't work for me. It's too easy to override them. But this, use field notes, right? Something that's going to be in your pocket, a pen, and a question comes up. Like, I wonder what that song is, or when is the Odyssey coming out, or what's a good dog food for a picky eater? Hey! Don't eat that. Is it bad if your dog eats a sunflower stalk, for example? I'll write that down and I'll check it out later. Just a moment of friction. And then also it does actually, so it's good because it introduces friction between me and the negative, but it's also positive to create writing something down is a very positive loop. Right? It forces me to notate what I'm really thinking, not just some vague anxiety. Right? This actually is a very good non-medicated cure or treatment for anxiety. This is something free-floating. Try to write it down in the moment. It only takes a second to write something down. It doesn't look that strange. It's a really good thing to do. I use field notes because a few years ago I bought every field note edition that came out, and I've got a backlog of them. If you don't have a backlog, you certainly don't need to buy the fancy field notes. Just anything that's just 3x5 size, something that go right in your pocket. It's really great. I'll talk more about the full everyday carry, like what do I actually, because I do carry more than this with me. I don't carry pipe and tobacco because I'm not really a smoker anymore. I used to be a cigarette smoker. I liked cigarettes. I do love cigarettes. This tobacco is nice. This is a very small bowl. It's Peterson Churchwood. Conducting. Okay, so last week I was away for the week at Towson University with Mark and Thakkar, who leads conducting workshops twice a year. This is now the third time that I've been. And A few years ago, I realized that it was an actual regret in my life that I never conducted orchestra. In my undergraduate studies, I was very focused on piano studies. Graduate work was composition. And the few times where the opportunity to conduct presented itself, I just lacked. I mean, I knew I lacked skills, but I also lacked confidence. A few years ago, 18 months ago, I got in touch with Marquand, and it's just one of those amazing opportunities where I went to one of his sessions as an associate, meaning I participated in the technique studies, but not in the orchestral sessions. And then it was in January of last year. And then summer of last year, I went back as a fellow, so I had podium time. And it just always, it's a marvel to me that I've been able, at 57 years old, to just kind of introduce myself to this study. And these workshops with Marquand are like the core of a master's degree. He also offers an online theory course through the year that I follow along with, like a seminar. So I just feel enormously fortunate to have wandered into this. And the experience of conducting Beethoven is prophetic. You know, it's like it's not power, but it's energy. And one of the things Marquand will say is the conductor is not conducting the players. We're not dictators saying, play it like this. There's an ideal that's available to us. And in that ideal sound world, the conductor is creating the space for all of the musicians who are participating to align on an approach to the music. And when you're dealing with the sort of, you know, the professional quality players in Baltimore, everyone's sharing a pulse, everyone knows the piece. What the conductor is doing is tweaking the edges and bringing everyone to just a shared, so it's really synced in. If you hear two sine waves that are just a little bit off, you hear a beat when they're perfectly aligned. It's that final fine-tuning that the conductor can do. Look, he does an exercise. We'll be up there waving our arms around. And it's not going well, so then you'll say, okay, stop conducting. Orchestra, play, and it's something like Beethoven's 7th Symphony. They all know this piece. They've all played it 1,000 times. And they will play it without the conductor better than when I'm up there. Okay, so what that proves is the conductor has an impact. In this case, a negative impact. So how do we flip that and have a positive impact? A positive impact by feeling the music, by being the music, and expressing that with a free, open technique that isn't filled with extra movement, that is inviting and solid, expressive, but clear. So we do a lot of exercises that are almost like Tai Chi to kind of get a free movement of the arms. And then we study the dynamic shape of the piece. And we memorize it. We memorize it to a greater or lesser extent. I don't have a great memory. I certainly couldn't tell you in bar 32 what the clarinet is like. But I should be able to. I just cannot. But I can, I know what's happening in the piece, and again, to greater or lesser extent, I know where it could go. and to greater or lesser extent, the craft of my conducting is to get everyone to that shared experience. And then it changes, right? If you're dealing with a less established orchestra or less mature players, or like a high school band, the objective is still the same, to create kind of a unified musical experience. But maybe younger players who are learning need more specific direction in terms of cueing or introduction. So my goal right now, my goal is to continue to develop confidence as a conductor so that I can continue to develop the Kaiser Ensemble. So this past spring, for the first time, I hired a group of players, about 15 of them, so a chamber orchestra, to play some music that I'd written. It gave me some conducting experience. It also gave me really valuable feedback on the composition. So I've done that. I'm a music director now, the music director of the Kaiser Ensemble. So what I'm going to do next, thinking it out, is spend the rest of this year kind of preparing. The fall of 2027, which is a year from now. The fall of 2027, season 1 of the Kaiser Ensemble, which will be, again, 15, 16 players, strings and winds. And I'll play a mix of my music and music for that chamber size that I particularly like. Trying to figure out how to get maybe a slightly larger force together to play some of the symphonies by David Stock, who's a Pittsburgh-based composer that I studied with in my master's degree 30 years ago, but he wrote some wonderful symphonies. And so there you go, right? So over the next couple of years, quarter by quarter, I've got these plans to continue my conducting studies and start to really develop a season for the Kaiser Ensemble. Maybe 2 concerts a year. Each concert has one of my compositions, and then 3 other pieces by other composers that I know, or pieces that I'm just particularly taken with. Came inside to get some more lighter fluid for my lighter, and thought I would play this piece by Olafur Arnalds, and it's actually something I heard on YouTube with a vocal group of Voces 8 singing, and it just was really beautiful. And I was looking around to find the score and realized that it's actually originally a piano piece. was bugging me that this was running out, so I just went to fill it in because now it's. Here we go. Oh, here's a quick snap. So to get to Baltimore, I took the train. I took the train from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. Met my daughter, who lives in Philadelphia, met her for a cup of coffee, and then took a train from Philly down to Baltimore. Which is awesome. We were supposed to get an extra run of the train between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia this year. But it's already summer. It hasn't happened, so I don't know if it's part of the infrastructure stuff that's been victimized by our current political circus. It's a real shame that it takes so long to get from Pittsburgh to Philly on the train. It leaves at 7:30 in the morning. It gets in at 3. I mean, it's totally pleasant. But it's a 5-hour drive, and that's an 8-hour train ride. And then it does go on through to New York. But that's even longer, of course. Same to D.C. From Pittsburgh to D.C. It's a really slow train. That leaves butt ugly over. That leaves like 5 a.m. It's one a day. And it gets into... I get off at the Rockville stop, which is where my parents live. And it gets in around 11 in the morning. But shouldn't that be like a 2-hour or 90-minute fast train ride? See if I can find the map of the proposed next generation of Amtrak. The corridor up and down the East Coast is entirely profitable, but you know what? Even if it wasn't, public transport doesn't need to be profitable. It's an investment in our civilization to be able to step outside, get on a bus every 3 minutes. You don't have to pay car insurance or buy a car. You don't even have to maintain roads if everyone's getting on a trolley, right? Get into town, get out to the airport, get to the train station, get it. It's an indicator of, I think, the sickness of our civilization, that we don't think of the ability to move around freely and easily without driving. We don't consider that an objective of civilization, right? Why do we live together if it's not, as as creatures, if it's not to make sure that we can all share in a certain level of lifestyle with healthcare and shelter and food and the ability to get where you need to get to. It's not even socialism, but even if it were, I'm all for it. Take your money and buy some trains. In fact, that reminds me about my short story, The Barnhouse Lacunae, which I wrote. Go read it. It was a heavy, particularly the last 2 pages, is I think quite a beautiful invocation even, of what a successful civilization will look for. I'll include a link in the show notes. Okay, meditation. Today, I've been thinking a lot lately about free will. I like very much the Waking Up application and podcast that Sam Harris does. I like his book on free will. But earlier in the year, I read Robert Sapolsky, Determined, which is about free will. I'm going to do a separate video just on that book. And in fact, I kind of think that my seminary studies, which start next month, the idea of free will, sovereignty, image bearer, that's a rich vein of theological study that I think has a direct impact on human flourishing. So not so much free will, but so part of the free will discussion for me, at least, is when we talk about free will, there's an assumption that there's a self, a concrete self, right, which is also part of the meditation practice. We study the nature of self. One way of considering meditation is that it is. That was a bus, if you heard that. It runs every 20 minutes, which is not bad. But what if it ran every 2 minutes? So here's what I'm thinking. I'm just going to lay this out. And this needs more work. But here's what I'm thinking right now. You tell me if this is interesting or if this leads anywhere. We, meaning humans, right, have kind of an intuition that somewhere, probably here behind my eyes, is a person. Or self. Some kind of controlling entity that is sitting back here making decisions, receiving input, considering options, and making a decision. So set aside the free will part of that. Let's just go right to the idea of where is that self? This is like the core of Buddhism. What is the nature of self? And the misapprehension of that self, the idea that there is actually a perpetually constant self, rather than a karmically colored set of processes and moments held together by metabolism. The idea that there's some concrete self is really at the root cause of our suffering. Because it leads to expectations and beliefs about how things should be. There was a jogger just went by, but lots of joggers. So we have this idea that there's a creature pulling the strings. We know there isn't. You know there isn't like a little person in here, but our intuition is that there is a person doing something. And one part of the meditation process is looking for that person and understanding what it is and where it is. Hang on a second. Hey, Baron, listen, come here. Come here. Come on. Come here. Come here. Come here. Sit down. Sit down. Up. Stay. Stay up. Whistle. Whistle. Baron. Stay. 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 Okay. So I think we have an equivalent misapprehension of the nature of God. Do we? Right? Questions. I'm making these as statements, but they're questions. What do you think of when you think of God? There's probably an element of thinking that there's some being within the world, within the universe. And I'm saying this whether you believe in God or not. In fact, this may be one reason why you don't believe in God, because it sounds patently ridiculous. Somewhere within the universe is a figure, perhaps a big old dude with a big beard, whatever the image is, kind of putting things together like big Lego blocks. I mean, with particular attention on creation of the earth. In the same way that there is no, in the same way that the nature of self is subject to scrutiny, you scrutinize the nature of God like that. Let go of the idea that there's a grand central commander divine God within the universe. And the relationship of God to his creation is the same as the relationship of our self to our incarnation, to our manifestation here. Right? Like a Trinitarian God that exists outside of space, outside of time. That maybe this is a holographic representation of that divine being, the same way that our understanding of the self is sort of an interpretation of a different nature, right? So as I meditate and use meditation in Buddhist practice to sit and calm the mind, focus, to learn to pay attention on the breath, which is one of the practices that I share here a lot. The intent being then to understand, to turn that attention back on the attender, the attendee and the attender, the observer and the observed. That dynamic comes apart under scrutiny. And so does the nature of the divine, in terms of, like I say, in terms of like a concrete being within the creation. All right, a couple more. Tarot cards. I read tarot. Not often for other people, although if you're watching this and you're interested and you want to get a reading, I do them for free. But it will take a few hours. But I draw a card most days, just part of my meditation. And recently, hey, Baron, Hazel, come here, Hazel, come here, Baron, come here, come on. Good boys. Yeah, you don't want to bark at those nice people. That's that little baby. And I don't think tarot is not, it's not divinatory. Because that's pagan. But it is an archetypal reflection, and I think we look at those cards and we glom on to the imagery. And I'm using a wonderful deck right now. It's so good. It's an artist, or a group of artists that have worked with the Marseille deck. Marseille, that's the town in France, I'm pronouncing it recently. One of the earliest extant tarot decks is from Marseille, from around the 1500s. So they've taken that deck, which is a very austere deck on its own, but they've taken the imagery from the Victorian deck, the Waite Rider deck, which is probably one they are first familiar with when you first get into tarot. And uses hey, Thistle, Barrett, come here, Barrett, come here, come on. Yes. They'll do anything for these turkey treats, even suppressing their natural instinct to run after everybody and bark. So recently, I've just had a sort of a run of odd-numbered swords. So the swords are the suit associated with mental activity, thinking. And the odd-numbered ones always end up with the swords kind of wrapped around themselves somehow. So you just get caught up in rumination or meditation, mendacity, lying to yourself. So some part of me is always anxious, even with a meditation practice and with prayer and scripture studies. I have a tendency to start the day with this upwelling of anxiety. And what the cards are helping me do is, because on the other hand, I feel I'm in a pretty good place with music and writing, study. These things are coming well. But there's a part of me that's just stuck. And what the cards are helping me do is, stay. Of course. What the cards are helping me do is just really, really tack onto that. It's very helpful. Because otherwise I'm just not that clued in. It's like holding a mirror. And the tarot deck just says, that constriction of the self. Usually, for me, it's around pride and the expectation that it should be recognized more somehow. Right? That's a particularly pernicious thought. Because all of this, everything I talk about, music, meditation, teaching, it only matters if it's authentic and experienced in the moment. It doesn't mean anything if it exists only when it's recognized. Do you know what I mean? So then why teach or why study? Well, because, and this will be part of the free will discussion, I do think free will doesn't mean predetermined. It means determined, not predetermined. We can change. You can change. Your ability to change is determined. You can change. The interjection of Dharma, the interjection of the resurrection, these are 8 historical actions that can redirect. So as a teacher, there's 2 things I think that a teacher needs to do and what I'm trying to establish in my own practice. One is, as widely as possible, to cast the teaching. So as many people as possible can be turned on to it, either from what I'm saying or more likely hear what I say and then go off and find, closer, deeper, more relevant to you teachings, right? And then the other part is you need to be receptive. So you need to sort of shake up the soil. The parable of Jesus talks about throwing the seeds onto the rocky soil, onto the soil where things are covered by thorns, or by the good soil where the seeds will grow. I think there's a really profound idea, not just this parable talking about the gospel, but not just about the Dharma and practitioner, but about what it is to be a human exposed to ideas and being able to adapt and change to those when they are positive, and not just when we are sort of buffeted by ideas. So these tarot cards prompt a lot of, they tie in a lot of that stuff into how I think about things. All right, let's wrap things up. I mentioned seminary. I start classes next month. I've enrolled at the Wesley Theological Seminary, which is in Washington, D.C. And I'm working towards the deacon orders in the Methodist Church. That's my aspiration. So I've also started the conversations with my pastor, with the church. And those of you who have known me for a long time are either terribly surprised about that because I've spent 20 years studying Buddhism, practicing Buddhism, or you're not at all surprised because it's just another thing. This feels like the definition of a call to teach within Methodism, and deeply attached to and attracted to, called to what Wesley called the means of grace. So prayer and meditation, which I consider like preparation of the soil, the scripture, studying the scripture, which I consider the seeds, and then the sacraments, particularly the Holy Communion, which is like nurturing, nurturing the teaching. So creating the space to continually evolve that relationship with Christ. So again, that class starts next month, and I'm just taking one course over the summer, and then a full course load in the fall. So, all right, let me know what you think about this format. I want to get one of these out a week, and then periodically topics, like my ongoing series about Messiaen, the composer. I've got a series I'm working on around Bach fugues. Reading a book that Ralph Kirkpatrick wrote back in the 60s, I think, 60s, 70s. Kirkpatrick was a great harpsichordist. He edited, I think, the current most popular edition of the Goldberg Variations. I think he premiered the Ives Concord Sonata on the piano. Just an incredibly interesting human being. But he wrote a book about the preludes and fugues from a performance perspective, so kind of reading through each of those chapters, working on the pieces, recording my own take on it. But that's a larger series that I want to keep working on. These are going to be more like weekly, grab bag. If you have questions, you should send them to me, and I'll include them on these videos. So with that, keep your wits about you, and I'll see you next week.